I'm Dan Hort. I'm one of the directors of the fair. And this is Winston Jordan. I think that probably many of you know, but some of you do not, so I'll give you a little bit of information about Winston Jordan, who is one of the most iconistic artists, I think, in the Caribbean, all over the region, and certainly here in Barbados. Very well-known cartoonist for the Nation newspaper, also very well-known as just a general artist around. He's a fixture at Carnival and has a very extensive costume design and photos of that, and has a lot of that kind of stuff. He was also a very iconistic presence, as I understand it, that he was a person on island that was very recognizable, very visible, and was somewhat of a cultural icon as well as being someone who specifically flavor, if you will. He passed away in December of 2007 at the age of 57. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. Our panel today is Pilgrim, who's the executive director of the Cafe Art Fair, Winslow Jordan, who is Winston's son, and Omar Kennedy, who is the owner and president of the Comic Con here on Island, and they, like Kafa, are going into their 10th year this year. So I'll tell you that also Winston Jordan's two most known cartoons were Belly Laugh and Jones, for those of you that know that. And I think we're just going to get right into it. And I wanted to start with you, Anderson, and if you would talk a little bit about, I'll do that in a minute, if you would talk about how this exhibit came to pass and some of the things that not only were happening for you and why you wanted to do it, but also some of the technical things that fell into place in order for this exhibit to be taking place.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Let me first just begin by saying that, you know, as a young man, as a teenager, the two influences who really pushed me towards the creative arts and something that I started to grow passionate about was my exposure to Yoruba House and Alambe's incubator at the time here in the 70s, and reading Beijing Belly Laugh and Jones in the Nation newspaper. That was amazing to me because I always loved comics growing up, and I read, you know, all the comics around. I had a huge collection. My aunt threw them out. Anyway, they would be worth a lot of money now. Anyway, and the comics we got in local newspapers at the time, several of them from the US and the UK, pretty recognizable names, you know, the Phantom, Dick Tracy, these kind of things. But when I started to see a cartoon that reflected me, really, and my contemporaries and the life that I saw immediately around me, it just opened my eyes to a whole different, you know, reality. So those two things were the impetus for me to finally kind of channel myself into the arts and so on. Many, many years later, a young man told me, "Oh, you know Winslow Jordan?" I said, "I don't know him, but I knew Winston Jordan." He said, "But that's his son. And he has a huge collection of his work at home." I said, "Wow, we need to meet this guy." Dan and I were here preparing for CAFA. It was 2 years ago.
We were at AnimeCon.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
it was.
That's it, okay. So we talked about that. We came down for CAFA the next year, and we connected with Winslow. We talked about doing something that year at AnimeCon, but I felt that someone of his importance needed a bit more exposure, presentation. I approached the National Cultural Foundation about doing a retrospective exhibit about his life and career. It didn't exactly work out that way, but circumstances felt that we were introduced to the Exchange Interactive Center, which is directly across the street here. It's a perfect location. The gallery is a beautiful space, and I went ahead and put together the exhibit with the able assistance of Winslow and my partners. We were told that we would need to push it back if we wanted to do it the way we originally planned. And I tend to be a little impatient with these things, and I know the bureaucracy. It might never happen if I didn't go ahead right now. So here we are. I hope those of you who haven't seen the exhibit, get a chance to go over and see it. It'll be up to April 3rd. But I think he's, as my partner mentioned, he's an iconic figure, iconic artist, and also he captured the soul of Barbados and the Barbadian personality, like no other person I've seen in my lifetime. So I think that we need to be aware, or the generations who are coming need to remember and know who this guy is, what he has contributed to the arts and to society. So that's just my little synopsis.
And I'm going to actually read a couple of quotes that echo that before we move on here for a second. This is one that I think speaks exactly to it. This person says they were fascinated by his innate ability to capture the very essence of the Bajan personality, that he was totally Bajan in every aspect of his creative expression, and whether he was designing masks for the annual crop over or commenting on current social and political trends in his cartoons that were seen by thousands in the Nation newspaper, his contributions to the culture of Barbados was profound, and his status as a cultural icon unquestionable. And I believe that that's true. He also apparently designed the first NCF logo, which is pretty interesting, with the donkeys and the canes. And he was very special, obviously. So our next panelist is Winslow Jordan, son of Winston Jordan, also an artist, does fine art, painting, and is a hip-hop artist recently, performs under the name Ruby Tech. And I wanted
The young cats would know all that.
They
Say the young cats would know that.
And I was trying to remember, I meant to ask you right before, you toured the U.S. with somebody. Who was it you were?
Hey, good afternoon. Good evening, everyone. My name is Winslow Jordan, as Dan just said. And who did I tour with? I toured with, at the time it was Nexus, we are now called 2 Mile Hill,
Right.
Jermaine Forrester, and
Yeah,
British South by Southwest. But that came after the Martinique tour, so
Right.
I get into that as well.
Right. So I wanted for you two, if you would, to talk a little bit about your father, the person. That one of the things that all of these quotes are talking about, and everybody who apparently knew him or was on island at the time knew that he was, he was an icon, and he was someone that people, could see. He was very, very visible, very prominent. But I assume to you, he was just that.
I was just going to say, I hope y'all got like 6 hours, but it's like... But seriously, I was very young when my dad died. At the time, when you're in your mid-20s, early 20s, whatever, you think that you lived a long time. But then when you get in your 30s and then you realize, like, I could live another 30-something, 40-something years. If you spent only, from the time you become aware of you'd be very, like, self-conscious when you're a child. And then you understand that and who these people are around you. It's a short space of time. So in that short space of time, I learned a lot about myself by mirroring my father. Because I told him, by 14, I can draw better than you. I can beat you. So it was like, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I know I wanted to beat my father at art. Not in a bad way, but he was always drawing. I was drawing till I was drawing from the time it was true. And my dad had never, he never deterred me from that. He never deterred me from anything, actually. Even where music and everything is concerned, he always was like, I like that song. I think you could do this. And even from people, like sometimes he would not tell me directly what he felt about what I was doing, but he would tell people, and he would tell people in a positive way. So I would be on the street and someone would say, your father proud of you, and I was like, for real? Yeah, he's proud of you. But for those of you who are not in intimate settings with my father, he was a jack of all trades. Well, a lot of trades. He was a cook, a very good cook. Anyone here being exposed to his cooking? Nah? Yeah, we are coming in a South house. Yeah, real South. In honor of my South houseness, I would eat ham at Christmas. So, you know, to honor.
Did he cook as an entertainer, or did he cook in a restaurant?
No, he used to cook at his home.
Just cook for people.
But and sell it.
And so-
And so he even had rastas eating pork and everything. No, seriously, he would, because people would come and he would be. This one thing that they had quoted me in paper Friday of saying that he was giving, and it's true. If you came to our house, you would leave with something. If you came and you happened to be cooking, he would extend the pot for you. So, you know, they had some rastas that would come there and you would be doing putting themselves. And I said, my dad want to know what you want to eat. This is like, what you want for me? I was like, this pickle, breadfruit, and this pudding. And you want that, right? No, what you put in for me? Everything. So I was like, rastas? And that's when I had a lot of my hair. So, yeah, so I was like, whoa, boy, that's the effect you had on people. And if he wasn't giving you sauce, he was giving you stuff over the fridge. He was like that. And a little bit before he died, there's this guy that wanted to invest in his work, a white guy called Omar. And he told me that he had never found another human being as no diss on anybody if you think that you're the most genuine person. But he said your father is without deception though. He said, I've never met a person like that there's no ulterior motive for your father. There's no deception in him. You say, I can't detect that. It's like, this man just want to create. He want to help people. He want to infect people with his art. And that's it. And it was like, I pondered on that because this person had not known us. They had not grown up with us. So why would he say that? So, and then I looked at it, I was like, it's true. Growing up, I was kind of rebellious in a sense. I still got a little bit of rebellion in me, but even then my father wasn't. I don't know, y'all go in my household and see, like, when I first started piercing my ears, and my father walked in the house and then he was like, you got your ears pierced? And I was like, no. And it was like, oh, okay. And I was like, so I can pierce my ears? So I'm really not pierce my ears? It really all works. But Dan was saying earlier about the comic collection and his influence. Even Omar was talking about that. You could see reflected in pieces such as these. Because my dad also became, at 13 or 12 years old, a heavy comic book collector. They got stuff like from the 80s, all polybag, hardback copy. And that was because of him. I didn't even know that he read my comic books. Because I didn't know you used to hold them. You got whole comics of particular way, but you were like, yes, you got the rusty books. You got the rusty books.
So you're a comic collection.
Yeah.
You have a pretty decent comic collection.
Yes, I do. Yes, I do, man. It's hard to sell them in Barbados, because nobody wants to pay you for them. But yeah.
I think it's a good segue actually to Omar, of course, because Omar, besides running Anime Con, which is the region's largest comic con, you also have a restaurant that is a geek-based restaurant. We were just there the other day for some burgers. And I guess it's more Game of Thrones than it is superhero. I think it's probably a fair assessment. But if anybody's ever been to Anime Con here, it's really something to see. And it's pretty amazing how just such a large percentage of the population on island is really committed to this thing. They come, it's incredibly good-spirited. They have a real interest in it, a real kind of deep passion for all of this stuff. And I just thought you could speak a little bit about the context of all of that and how, of course, Winston Jordan's, as a precursor of all this, and how his legacy is still felt in all of that.
Okay, I like to consider myself king of the geeks.
I consider it that also.
I embrace it. I was called a geek from the time I was 5. And it never stopped, and I said, it's what I am, and I embraced it, and I let persons know that your geekiness is fine. And when I was growing up, I had a cousin passed away. He was my father figure. My father also passed away at a very young age. This guy called Lance Stevenson, who's my cousin, and he was a brilliant artist, and he loved comics, and he got me into loving comics as well. He used to draw comics, and I wanted to be just like him, so I drew my own comics, I wrote books, I created games, board games, and we created together, do all sorts of stuff. And he got me onto Marvel, he got me onto DC, he got me onto Mad Comics, Mad Magazine, and Cracked. And that is when I first realized, because Mad and Cracked, they had their mascots. For Mad, it was a guy called Alfred E. Newman, and for Cracked, it was Sylvester P. Smythe. And, you know, that was fine and good, they were hilarious. But then I discovered Winston Jordan, he had Jones. And Jones was, I got a rat, you know, and it was fantastic because he was one a week, you know. He was a Caribbean-based version to these iconic characters which I would read in my international magazines. So when I did not truly appreciate the depth of Mr. Jordan's art until when I really saw a lot of what he did today. And I could see the comic influences. I spoke to Tech earlier and I said, your dad had a strong comic influence, did he? He was like, yeah, I said, I can see it. In some of his works, I saw, I'm not sure how familiar you guys are with the comic persons. With Stan Lee, who passed last year, there was another gentleman called Jack Kirby, who created a lot of the major and great superheroes from the Marvel Universe. And Kirby had this specialty for these dots that he would put around these persons when they're manifesting their powers or whatnot, which were called Kirby dots, affectionately. And I can see some of the Kirby dots mixed with some pointillism in Mr. Jordan's work, and it was fantastic how he took some of the older art forms, the pointillism, combining it with the Kirby dots of the 70s and 80s, and put it into a contemporary piece, which is brilliant. You know, you look at some of his stuff. It was, let me just make sure I get the names correct. I believe it was called Bajan Beauties. I believe, just give me 1 second. Cubism Cuties. And you know, you can see the Picasso in his work. You know, and I'm looking at these things, and as you can tell, I was an art student before as well, so I have an eye for this stuff. And when I see the old way of doing things, the older, the traditional way, mixed with the new age, you get touched right here in that special spot. So I did enjoy it. There was another one he did, Boys on the Block. There's some more cubism in there.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, it's fantastic. The way he does his black and white pieces, you know, you see how he does the cross-hatching mixed with the pointillism again. It's a really beautiful work. Please, if you get a chance, go over and take a look at some of this work. It is fantastic. Even his still images, his cricketing images, you know, they are still images, of course, they're paintings, but the action movements behind the cricketers, they make the characters seem so fluid. When you're seeing Spider-Man swing through Manhattan, you get some of those same types of effects in the major comics, and you're seeing them right here. Homegrown Bajan work, you know, take a look, this is fantastic stuff. So, you know, you have to appreciate, I'm so sorry it took me this long to realize what a treasure we had lost, because he was simply fantastic.
And these pieces that we have up today are largely later in his career, and I think really highlight, it's just funny you're breaking it down out. Now I'll geek out for a second. You know, but he also has one of Tech's favorites is Jim Lee. He has a lot of Jim Lee color in there, and it's interesting to see as you're talking about the Neil Adams cross-hatching and the Kirby dots, that he was had a long enough career to actually not only span some of those things, but to actually make them his own. And it's incredibly unique. You really don't see, I mean, you know, it's a very big thing now in the States, obviously with Black Panther coming up and being so successful, and you know, starting to highlight some of these African American artists that were in comic books. It's not a very long list. And so it doesn't take long before you start to look for these ancillary people in history, and this is a big one. And it's very, very interesting, and I've actually thought maybe you could feel this a little bit, is he also was apparently an original, I don't want to say multimedia, but was someone that really had broad-based interest, like you. He apparently had a band that did music, that was his main, that was his first love.
I wasn't about to reach me when to say that.
Exactly right.
But this just covers one dimension of the artist, because he actually worked in three-dimensional. Like Andrew King would know, maybe I would know. Yes, I keep mixing up your name. I don't know. It's one person. Yeah. But he was into three-dimensional work. So I think that's the natural extension for most artists too.
Did he sculpt?
I have seen no sculptures, but three-dimension is a form. Yeah, three-dimensional in costuming is a form of sculpting. Like the steel donkeys I spoke about last week. If you go in the museum, you can find those. And we also did large floats as well. But he wasn't into the costuming that needed views or needed to be carried by some external force. He was into your own body resistance. So he would make something that is large but very light. And it was also something like a depth of like, you had wire, you had foam, then you had fabric, then you had beads or whatever. So when you see the drawings, the paintings, and the exchange, remember that's only one aspect. There's a guy that was doing all aspects. He could probably make the shirt on your back. And then enhance it. Actually, that's one of the places that they did start. If you don't see me, when he started in the 70s, early days of popover, is after the influence of his mother, Elaine, and his stepfather, Emery, started with t-shirts. So he was doing them by hand. So all the River Road boys, all them, the Riverside boys, they had these shirts. And some of them still have these shirts to this day. So it actually withstood the test of time because of the detail. And the other thing is that he was into detail. Shout out to my guy, Jay Paris, who was talking about detail last week. Right. He did for the painting. My dad was into that. He was not a shortcut person. So you can't come on me with a short, because everything had to be invested with time and professionalism. And he worked with Fabrice, so Fabrice being from Italy, you had to, this internationally recognized guy, so you had to bring that.
And you can see it in a lot of his cartoon work, the elaborate backgrounds. And that's frequently you see that in comic strip and comic book, is these incredibly elaborate backgrounds that go with whatever the action is, and it's almost a throwaway because of the style of the art, the way that the art is meant to be perceived, that you sometimes miss it. And
it's kind of funny that you spoke about line and props.
100%.
If you look at some of the feet in his characters,
yes,
they're bent like those of the man comics, if you pick that up.
Yep.
And so that's a ode to Nash. Sergio Aragones.
Right. Yes. And Dean Martin. Don Martin.
Yeah. And you mentioned Fabrice. I have a statement here from a gentleman who actually was mentored by Winston, Michael Pickett, who is now a retired manager of design at the Barbados Investment Corporation. When he heard I was putting this together, he was so excited. He wanted to be a part of this. Unfortunately, he came down with the flu this week and he wasn't able to attend today, but he sent me a statement about his interactions with Winston. And I'll just give you a few snippets of it here. But I first met Winston when I joined the firm Graphics as a junior commercial artist. This is Michael Pickett speaking. The company was a subsidiary of Corbin Compton Advertising Agency and had as its managing director the Italian designer Ermanno Fabrice, whose contribution to Barbadian graphic design is yet to be fully acknowledged. On the design staff at the time were other well-known artists like the late Ronnie Cumberbatch, Mr. Keith Gall, Mark Maynard, Christine Dare, Ronald Watson, and Anthony Delaney. The late Charles Romeo Smith was our Report Graphics camera operator. Many of the calypsos for which he became so well known of that period were composed in the Polygraphics darkroom and tested on the art room staff. Now you can imagine working in an environment like that with these kind of creative people. And I could understand how these personages went on to become top designers, artists, and of course Romeo Calypso, King of Barbados. And out of that, this is where Michael Pickett learned his craft. He moved on to study overseas, came back, and as they said, is now retired. But that's the kind of influence he had.
Well, it's interesting because, again, and it's a point that I sort of was trying to make before, is he's very much a peer of some of the big names, certainly in U.S. comics, and it's not surprising that he had a lot of those same kinds of influences. That Neil Adams owns a studio as a graphic designer, Jack Kirby had a studio, did graphic design. By the way, Walt Disney did pretty much, that was for most of his life at any rate, where the money really came from, was that they were doing ad work and agency work and post-ups and sort of pre-print production.
Can only dream on the side.
Exactly, and in the meanwhile, doing the things that he was doing. And all of these guys, I mean, Kirby invented Captain America while he was making ads for the military, you know, and things like that. So it's not a shock at all to me to see that he would have been this kind of cross-platform guy. And the one that I think is actually quite funny, and again, I'll just plug AnimeCon 2019, right? The Scions of Midgard this year, and going into its 10th year, is one of the things that when I first went to AnimeCon, which is already now going to be about 5 years ago, I would think, was the incredibly impressive cosplay at this show. I was really not expecting that, as I do the international circuit. I do the first world circuit, I go to San Diego, I do New York, I do a lot of the big shows, and the cosplay at AnimeCon, especially the best of the best there, it's beyond high level. It's as good as anything else you're going to see in the world. We had a kid from Trinidad, which was Galactus.
Incredible.
Yeah, it was unbelievable. And by the way, the pictures went viral. We had 2 years ago, the kid that did the Naruto dance got over 1 million hits or something like that. That it was, but the quality was very, very high. And it took me a minute to realize that part of what made it so special, and they're super supportive, it's a lot of fun, it's really very, very positive, but that there is something very analogous to Carnival, and that it is very similar in a lot of ways, costuming and parading and having fun and these kinds of things. And so I wanted to, maybe Omar, you could start us off with this one, is to talk a little bit about that connection. And again, perhaps how Winston as an artist would have made that crossover, where because he was interested in Carnival, and because he was doing that he was able to make that connection.
Absolutely. You did something very, very important just now. When you mentioned the Neil Adams studios, the Walt Disney studio and whatnot. We need a Beijing studio, and that is what AnimeCon is working on. We're not just a pop culture convention where you can just come and dress up and sell a few wares or whatnot. We are firm believers that the creatives in Barbados are grossly underappreciated. If you have a high-level intellect in Barbados, you can make 6 figures easily. You can go to any bank, you can go to any large company and make over $100,000 normal and easy, very, very casually. If you have an artist with that same level of talent, he will still be struggling. He will. Whether he sings, whether he draws, whether he paints, whether he animates, and we have some top-class people. When DC Comics came to Barbados, about 7 years ago, they said that they could not believe the level of artists that Barbados and the Caribbean was pushing on, and were so underappreciated and unknown. And they spoke to some of our guys and said, here's what to do. Apply to DC Comics. Apply and apply and apply. Now they're DC Comics. So they get literally millions of applications every year from persons who want to be on their retainer. So they, one of the artists got there, a guy called Chris Batista. You know Chris?
Sure, of course, yeah.
Chris is one of the best artists you will ever meet in that media. And he had to apply 500 times before getting into DC Comics. And the good thing about working for DC or Marvel, you don't need to live in the States to do it. You live here, you submit everything digitally, and you get paid. You know, you can do it right here. And what's that?
And increasingly they have,
So there are these things that we need to tell persons that when you are doing art in Barbados, art is not limited to drawing some fruit as still life, or a ball and a cube and whatever, and say, yes, that is art. That's not just what art is, that's part of what art is. And we at AnimeCon are trying to create that knowledge so we can slim the divide between the creatives, the respect the creatives and the intellectuals get. Because we know that when the Captain Marvel movie came out, when the Avengers movie came out, when Black Panther came out, we all rushed to the theaters and we watched it. But when an animator who can do similar quality work says, I will do a 30-second ad for you and it will cost you $20, you will look at him and say, that's too much money. Let me get somebody who can do a fraction of it and pay him $3. We will not respect the artists who are here. And that needs to change. That first comes through education. The persons who have the money, the persons who will be doing the hiring, need to be educated and understand that if you want to compete on an international market, you cannot have a local mindset. We are teaching our exhibitors at AnimeCon the same thing. Yes, you are local, but you have international level talent. We grew up under a colonial structure for economics in Barbados, where you have to manufacture things for export or for selling to the local market or whatever have you. We cannot compete with China, we cannot compete with India, we cannot compete with Mexico, the US, Canada, because our costs are too high. Where we all have a level playing field is with intellectual property and creation.
There's no question, and by the way, I think AnimeCon is absolutely exactly what you're saying. The other thing that we've been talking about a lot over the course of the week is, for lack of a better way to say it, how to monetize. What is the value of art, and how can we assert economic stimulation and economic viability with these things to then force the other entities, the government and foundations and things like that, to come through. And I do believe that I think it's specific to comics in general because of its interesting crossover appeal of being a art form, but also being a for hire. That generally speaking, it's very difficult if you want to get a comic book done to not pay that artist. That's just the way it goes, is you're not going. And by the way, they get paid quite well, as you know.
Yeah, I'd like to touch on that a little bit there, because that same concept that you're mentioning there with the comic art, it applies to visual art also, and this is an area that's hardly been touched in the Caribbean, which is rights fees and image rights, publishing, advertising. Before, folks used to come down here and just steal images and take them and publish it wherever, and no one will get credit for it. But one of the things about technology is that it has made everything flat, and you can know when people are doing stuff, they'll show up. So the area of image rights and intellectual property is an area that visual artists have to explore and look at. And I think I've presented I've done a couple of presentations here on that, and we brought one of the international agencies down, matter of fact. I think that was probably the second CAFA fair that we held. We brought one of the international rights agencies down to speak to the government at the time, or National Collection, which most of you have probably never seen. It's in storage or in some government buildings, can be generating income today, right now, if we just do the right thing. And folks, they listened to the presentation, but no one ever followed up on it. And we presented this not just to government and the Barbados, the committee for the National Art Gallery, but this was presented to individual artists. And many of them they asked questions, of course, which, it's about finding out how these things work with intellectual property. There are rules and laws. You can go on the internet and look them up. As someone was mentioning in an earlier panel, these things are covered by international rules. So if you get a cover of, if your image is on the cover of a book, you get a set fee. If you're inside, whatever, there's a fee structure in place, and you get paid in US dollars or euros from these agencies, right? So this is another source of foreign exchange and an income stream for artists. Many of them are scared to work with an agent or work with an agency who is making money, quote unquote, off their work. But look at it this way. The agency or the agent is generating the business for you. You have the image there and it's yours, but you're not generating anything from it beyond selling the artwork. The agency is going to go there and sell that to some international corporation, and they will pay for the rights to use your image in whatever they're doing. And you can also you will also, beyond the initial payment, there are royalties. So it's an income stream that's waiting to happen, and it's something that we need to explore a little further.
I'd like to add to that. How many of you know we have an animation company right here in Barbados, an internationally ranked animation company? Do you know that that animation company has done work for cartoons which show on Cartoon Network? You know, they've done stuff for, I don't know how many of you may know it, it's a cartoon called Rick and Morty. And the company here has done animation for Rick and Morty. The lady,
That employs Vision
I
artists.
can't remember the name that comes off the top of my head, but it's run by Aisha King. And she told me that, you know, at some point in time, Cartoon Network was being down there because they weren't churning out work fast enough. You know, these are ways to get foreign exchange. So some of our best animators actually had to relocate to Canada, you know, because it's a very large animation hub in Canada. I think it's in Montreal or Vancouver or something like that. And there they are up there in the cold, making money from their dream from art. And what we try to let persons know in AnimeCon as well is, yes, 20 years ago you may not have had that opportunity, but now the opportunities are there. Create your own work. When you look to Hollywood at this point in time, you're seeing movies being rebooted every summer, and you're saying, oh, this crap all over again. And I was speaking to a young Caribbean author. His name is Tobias Buckell. He's from Grenada, I believe it was. He was a guest at AnimeCon maybe 7-8 years ago. And he said to me, Omar, you watch this. The reason why they're having so many reboots is because Hollywood has run out of content. And they are now
And they don't want to recycle them.
and they were just recycling, you know. And they are now coming, they're now scouts in the Caribbean, in Africa, all over Europe, in Asia, to find content to bring over into the US to tell different stories. And what they're looking for is persons like us who have stories to tell. So for my publishing company, I have a company called The Salt Train Chronicles. And that's in the novel TS Universe. It is basically an epic adventure about a young Barbadian who survived an apocalypse to realize he was immortal, and it now tracks the next 10,000 years of his life. And it is, as I said, a white-faring epic, which I am now pushing to international companies. If I can get it taken up by, you know, a large Hollywood company who wants to do, or HBO wants to do a Game of Thrones treatment on it, I will go ahead. So instead of seeing things like dragons and castles, you will see things like duppies and steel donkeys and Baku. You know, you get to see this. I would love to see this treatment done by HBO. It's 5 stars on Amazon. Thank you very much. You know, and the book is doing very well. So hopefully, in time, we get it picked up by someone. You know, we're currently creating a video game for it. You know, if you're creating goals for yourself, as artists, as creatives, as a human being, if your goals don't scare you, you're not thinking hard enough. And whenever I wake up in the morning, I say to myself, Omar, you committed to this. Don't you like to sleep? What is wrong with you? But then you realize, you know, this to get the greatest rewards, to make the greatest sacrifices, you have to think outside the box. And that's also what AnimeCon is all about, trying to get persons to think outside the box. And this is where Mr. Jordan was a pioneer, because he bridged two worlds between the traditional and the contemporary, and was so good at it. And we need persons to see and understand what he has done, understand the philosophical underpinnings of his art, and then use his example to inspire them to push their own work. So that is what we're all about.
There you go. Yeah, and it's interesting, I just say as one more plug, we did a panel this year with Charlie Adlard, who's the
Last year.
creator. Yeah, not just coming here. But nevertheless, and Mark Texera, and Charlie worked, was the main artist and is the main artist on Walking Dead, which is obviously done quite well. And Mark Texera had done the Black Panther series that had been picked up, most of the movie scripts from that were the storyline that Mark had worked on.
Yeah, the female warriors.
Exactly. He created the Dormelage and all that. But we actually had a panel where also similarly talking about business opportunities, job opportunities, and one of the things that came up in that, which Omar just really hit pretty home, and I want to make sure that I reinforce it, is that in those medias, the opportunities are already there. That there's a tremendous amount, like I remember specifically somebody asked a question that why wasn't there enough African folktale characters being put into comic books? And so I guess I make the circuit, and so I'm informed, is I then listed about 5 for him. I was like, no, they're out there. And that the markets are definitely hungry for them. There's a lot of outlets for it. So I think that it's a good one to really focus on, because another theme that I've heard, I don't know if I heard it so much in the panels, but I've heard it certainly sort of whispered in the aisles, is the youth. Where are the young people? What are the next group of artists? How are we going to engage them? And this is obviously a terrific way, because it's very accessible, it's something that people have seen, but it's also, I think that when we talk, I know when Omar and I have talked on panels in the past, and afterwards I've had parents come up to me, and they're like, do you really think my kid could make a living doing art? And I'm like, if your kid can, even if they won't become Picasso, there are enormous amounts of agency applications and other kinds of outlets for these things, and I think it does create a sense of calm in the household with a kid who has an art ability or who is suddenly interested, whereas once, and this actually, I'd like to sort of bring it home here and see if Winslow can talk a little bit again about his father and his home life, and his support that he started to talk about, where he would come in and his father was very supportive, that many artists, sort of a certain age, did not grow up in a household where they were encouraged, did not grow up in a situation where they were, where somebody knew that you must have been very blessed to have, someone in your purview that not only was supportive of you, but was in fact doing it and had showed the way.
All right. Well, first off, I want to say that I think my dad died 11 years too early, because as you're saying, when you have a studio, one of his missions was to create a comic book culture here.
So funny, I was just thinking that also.
Yeah, it began with Jones, and then from Jones he started to, people would look in the paper every weekend, Fridays and Saturdays, to see these cartoons. And then he developed it under one umbrella called Beijing Belly Laugh, which is his imprint to this day, and he created a logo FSR type font. Every single letter of the alphabet done in this particular style, which that is his own, original design.
Matter of
And it's
fact,
money in that too,
yeah, let me just say this. Apparently, it is the only Barbadian fully functional typeface that was developed. This is, in the words of Michael Pickett, to the best of my knowledge, Winston Jordan is the only Barbadian designer to have developed a fully functional typeface, which is Beijing Belly Laugh. It's an extraordinary achievement.
But on the other side of it, growing up in that house, in his household, I I never had to really look for a job. There was always work around. And that's one of the things that Omar is talking about too, using your talents to earn your daily bread. So he had, from these cards are not recent creations. These are what he created from back then. It's just that I kept them in good condition. So along with the collection of election humor and cricket humor, those were all things that he did to support himself, to also support other artists, because he was always thinking of how to create the machine, how to create the system that could feed, from the artists to the writers to the people who don't any legwork. So having grown up with that, his mother had owned a salon in Near Lawrence, and that was a big, a fairly sized salon, so there was always entrepreneurship in the family. And within him, and then that went over to me, because this is probably 10 years I have never worked for anyone. And as Omar says, I don't know if you're reading, the guy that did the E-Myth Revisited, Michael E. Gerber, Les Brown, listening to guys like Gary Vaynerchuk and those, but as he said, if the dream frightens you, that's probably a dream that you should go after. And he was like that. And he invested that in me as well. As I said, like, we're concerned with music. And that's another element that we even haven't touched on. He was a musician as well. He was, Andrew King went on, he was one of the main judges for Crop Over, Pick of the Crop for years and years, Richard Stowe. I mean, to the point, I was in the Richard Stowe Teen Talent show, and he had to remove himself because I was performing. So he would not, confident interest, and he did it on his own. So that's the type of guy that my dad was. And for a lot of years, I was like, why are they changing all the judges? It didn't have a year that they had let go of all the judges except him and one other. Is it correct? Yeah, but he was there for a long time, and it was always, if it wasn't one thing, it was next. I'm sure you could go into paper, you go into the archives of the nation, you'll find excerpts on him being a performer, him being a flag person. Yeah, one flag man for many years. He was heavy in the flag.
They're part of the exhibit.
Yeah, man. And then you can go into the comic book side, the illustrator side, the teacher side, mentoring. A lot of people. There's a photographer here. She told me that she spoke to my dad. I don't know where she is. And she was saying that he gave her some words when she was much younger. It was like my father, he talked to everybody, because people still coming up to me now, 11 years after, and your dad gave me some invaluable information and really encouraged me. And I try to emulate him in that way. The one thing that we do have in common is memory. Because I find, when they go down there and they look at the art, like I usually do it piece by piece, but to see all the art spread out, it was like, there's a lot of women in here. And someone left a comment in there, it's nice art and a lot of big bumpers. Yeah, man. So
he was a guy who was interested in things, as are a lot of great artists, as someone that are much more broad-based. For example, I assume he must have been a big cricket fan.
He was.
He couldn't do what he did without being such a fan of sport.
He was.
Frequently you find artists and nothing of it. They're not.
And in entire sports too, because he was interested in basketball as well.
Right?
It's just that.
And was he interested in it as a sporting pursuit, or was he more interested
basketball?
Well, I just mean as an artistic. For example, I had an epiphany when I first realized that they liked to paint horses and ballet dancers. That he was interested in the physicality, that he was interested in muscle tone and things going on, shape and form, and this type of thing. And so never more, whenever I see artists painting athletes or painting whatever, I realize or think to myself that they must be interested in something that isn't just the competitive thing that people are drinking beers and watching the game.
Right.
But I think that your father was a big cricket fan, that he
was.
enjoyed drinking beers and watching the game.
He wasn't a beer drinker. He was very, very social. We had drinks in the house that were never touched. Yeah, sorry to disappoint you if you thought he was a big drinker, but he would be out and he would drink beers, but we had, if you go back, you have your house and you got something, whatever, you got Hennessy, whatever.
Right.
But that was just, if you come over, but
Right.
he never drank that stuff. And he was a very focused artist. He had very few voices in my years of recollection. Very few voices. His voices was art. If there was a TV program, if there was a movie, he would watch it, and then he would create a piece of art. If you notice the stories from the comic strips that he did, he was heavily inspired by Calvin and Hobbes too. Because Calvin and Hobbes, one thing he did say is, for you to do comics and caricatures, which simplified art, you had to know how to do perfect art first, and then deconstruct it.
Correct. I was just saying that actually before, is that in order to break the rules, you have to know the rules.
Yeah.
One thing I noticed, as we said, we know from his art that he loved crop over carnival, we know he loves cricket, we know he loved the female form. There was a piece, I'm wondering if this was more on female form, or this was a religious piece, or deconstruction of religion piece, the bush bath.
Oh, yes, yes.
It's a fantastic black and white piece which he's done, with this woman standing in a tub, and there are candles around the guy with the bush, and
That was actually Bayesian folklore, because from stories I have been told, and by him and my grandmother, that was a way that, like, if you were sick or you wanted to be healed, or even you wanted money too, you wanted wealth to come in, perfect health, you would get bush bath. And there was also the duality of, when I looked at it closely, it looked like the guy had a reverend collar.
Correct. Yeah.
So I was like, was this a reverend? Because the reverend doing the
He also
Orville
has
thing.
the third eye. I'd say the third eye.
Reverend.
Yeah. but truthfully, as a people displaced from Africa, we adopted one heritage or one culture, but we also had our original culture, which was more African. So people did both, as you found in Haiti and Brazil, where people would learn Roman Catholicism or whatever, but still had yes, exactly. So,
Played one to the other.
sure.
But he wasn't into witchcraft, right? He liked cricket, but
And being all into witchcraft.
well, I think you have to be interested. That's sort of what I'm getting at. Is that people who are good at things are frequently interested in things. But it's amazing how that works.
Yeah, well, I think it's the underlying notion of, the idea of it, I mean, like, growing up, you would hear these things, the steel donkey, it's all in his vernacular, in his work. And he tried to capture those things and present them, I think, from an artistic point of view, but also, you could tell that he did research on it. It wasn't just an image that he threw out. I mean, his stuff is just so authentic. And it reflects, stories that our grandparents would have told us back then. So it's, again, the Bajan essence, who we are as a people, he captured it, better than anyone, I think.
I want to try to wrap it up so we get a chance in case some people want to ask questions. So I'm going to really quickly just say that he also did political cartoons, that he did a lot of that was a big part of his business.
That was the bread and butter of the
Yeah,
nation, too.
yeah.
I mean,
And commentary
Yeah,
cartooning,
social
which was what that was all about, and he's one of the foremost people in that. So I guess let's try to open it up for some questions. If anybody's got anything for us, let's hear it.
I was just wondering if there's anything. I was just wondering if there's anything in the works for a scholarship under his name, because with his name and with everything that he has in his history, that would be a great way to get the children involved.
I was actually going to mention that to Omar a little later.
Yes, actually, now that I've seen and I've been touched by his work, we plan on a Nikon 3 years in advance, so budgets are pretty tight. But what I can do, even if it starts small, I'll speak to the other directors involved and see if we can create something in his name for young artists and persons who are doing work which have a pop culture feel to it. So it did cross my mind when I was in the gallery. I'll speak to the others and I'll see, as I said, if it starts small, it can grow over time. But yes, it's something that I'm quite interested in at this moment.
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Alexander. I'm speaking on behalf of my wife, Rochelle Burke. Well, she had a stroke a while back, but she made, before she had the stroke, she created a book called Lenny from His Way. And she wanted to know more, she wanted to get it animated. So she wanted to know what steps to take to get this book animated.
Okay, to get the book animated, we have a plethora of students and good animators in Barbados. My first step to you would be to figure out what your budget is, because these things, they will not be cheap. They will not. And the reason why, the equipment is expensive, it's time consuming, there is a lot of work which goes on in the background to see 15 seconds of animated work. So if you're talking an entire novel, it will take time. So when you see these cartoons put up with Marvel or DC or whatever, you know, these things cost millions of dollars to make. I'm not saying you need millions of dollars, but you know, there will be some outlay. I would recommend that you check BCC first. They have a very, very talented student body which does some fantastic work in animation and with regular still work, and see if you can work with them, and if you can have it as some kind of project that the students work on for credits or whatever have you, that may help you subsidize the cost of your dramatization of your novel. So yes, that's a good place to start. If you're looking for persons who are already established, it will be more pricey, but it can be done as well. You can always speak to me afterwards. I can see if you can find one or two persons who would be able to work with you.
Hi, this is for Wikitek. You spoke of the body of work that Winston has. How can you, what shall I say, capitalize on that? Monetize, capitalize, how can it work for you still have
You mean our family per se, the estate, in terms of how we can...
You'll have to directly there, because I just want to know what you can do with the work that he has to just make it something that you can make money from.
Well, so far, I've had a couple of entities approach me about doing a book, a collection of his work in a book format. That's also something that you could do, follow up on Omar's example and put on Amazon or what's not, and have people purchase the book, because there are several people who are looking for that. They're not everyone who might not want to buy a piece, but you also have the smaller pieces such as the cards. You also have the smaller pieces such as the election humor and cricket humor. That is the area that you were looking at, or you mean another?
I meant your whole body, I meant the body, I just meant the body.
The original works are all for sale, of course. And you can, anyone can purchase those, but beyond that, there are the image rights and the merchandise that he created.
Okay.
So, that's an avenue that we will pursue with Winslow and his family. But there is also interest in his collection of works outside of Barbados, because, as I said, the nation had such a wide reach, and wherever that went. So the UK, and the fact that he used a lot of cricket imagery, it has enormous cachet to market it overseas.
Just now that I have the mic, I just want to pay a 30-second tribute to Winston, because having worked at the nation for over 32 years, I've been in contact with him on a weekly basis, as Winslow would know. And what he really did to me that always stands out, that I gave him the idea to do a cartoon, sort of a comic thing. And he did it. I wouldn't identify it, but it made the pages of the nation, and I will always have that as the...
Why not?
And he always listened to you. He really always, he was a very great listener, and he would always entertain any ideas that you give him.
Yeah, I have a question. Winslow, especially, listening, I've really enjoyed listening to you talk about your father. That's the first thing. In these days when fathers are much maligned, it's really great to hear the way you speak of your father and what a great example he must have been to you. I too had a good father, a role model father. And it's always good to hear it, because, we need to hear it from fathers. So thanks for that. My question is this. He seemed to be able to take folklore and somehow contemporize it in a way that made it, almost give it a new reality and get away with it. Because the purists don't really like that. They see folklore as folklore and contemporary is contemporary. But he seemed to have a knack of making it happen, bringing it together. Are you able to tell me why you think he was able to do that? What is it about him and his work that made him able to cross that divide? Because there is a divide and the purists really don't like to deal with that divide, but he seemed to have dealt with it really successfully.
That's an interesting question. The first thing we'll go to is age. The age in which he would have come up in. Like, he died at 57, 58. During that time, Barbados would be transitioning from a more plantocracy into people being more intellectually endowed, able to read more, able to be educated more. So he was at that junction between, as you said, like folklore, the stories, but also your eyes opening up to the Western world. Like he was heavily influenced by guys such as Rudy Nebres and even the music from outside, from Motown and what's not. So it's like you're meeting the old with the new, and he was the representation of that. I also think that is within every artist to have that renaissance and be that junction, because as an artist you should never, to me, unless you want to, stick and say, well, this old is the right way and this new is the right way and be done with the old. You're always that, that thing, the fork in the road within you, and I think he emulated that, as I do too, because you have to, as we were speaking earlier about knowing how to do the thing before you break it down. So once you carry that as your sentiment within yourself, you will always be both the new, but also the traditional. And I think that's what's within him. And when I spoke earlier about the guy that had wanted to invest in his work, seeing that he was very transparent, it means that all artists, from what I see and hear from on the wall, to the one's hand, is we observe first before we speak, before we do, before we paint. And what comes out is a reflection of the era that we are in. And I think that was always him. He always reflected, if you go back through the cartoons, from the 70s, you saw his art style change between, from 70, well, if it was 73, 74, and going to the 80s, then it became even more intense. As the world outside became more intense, our view becomes more intense as artists. The music changes. For myself, the music will change. So we are that bridge. He was that bridge between those two hemispheres. Hope that answers your question.
It does, thank you. And I'm glad you took it where you took it, to broaden it to artists in general. I believe you're dead right. That's one of the things we as artists need to be able to do, to bridge that divide and not just put ourselves in one bag or the other. So thank you, Jan.
Thank you.
And thank you, everybody. This was terrific.
Just remind you, the exhibit, the Winston Jordan tribute exhibit, will be up until April 3rd. After CAFRA is over, that will remain. So take your young people, tell your friends about it, go through and check it out.
And it's Monday, Friday?
It's Tuesday through Sunday. Yeah, 10 to 6, they're open, Tuesday through Sunday. Thank you.
I'm sorry.